Plagued, Book 1, The Girl Who Chased the Shadows, by Garrison Scott. Copyright 2017. For David. Prologue. 5 years ago, the Karoo, South Africa. In South Africa, just outside of the small town of Sutherland, Dr. David Kim was in full-out panic mode at his station at the South African Astronomical Observatory. At the time, the observatory was home to one of the world's largest telescopes, and although the tourists made their way in and out of the facility quite frequently, there was real work being done there. At that early hour, however, Dr. Kim was alone, which was a good thing. A very good thing, in fact, for on that particular morning, Dr. Kim could be found furiously rubbing his forehead and mumbling to himself as he broke into a drenching sweat. He continuously looked back and forth from his tablet computer to the monitor attached to the large telescope next to him.
Christ!
After checking and rechecking his data by tapping, scrolling, and swiping at his tablet, Kim could no longer deny the reality of the situation. He made his way to a messy desk nearby and started digging around the loose papers and haphazardly tossed file folders on top of it. Within a few minutes, he found what he was looking for: a faded and dog-eared business card with the NASA logo front and center. He picked up the phone and punched in the numbers from the card and waited. After a few rings, a sleepy voice on the other end answered.
It's 2 a.m. This better be good.
James Garrison? This is Dave Kim from the SAAO. I'm sorry to bother you in the middle of the night, but there's a problem with XF-11.
James Garrison propped himself up in his bed at the mention of XF-11. 1997 XF-11, the official name, happened to be a rather large and rather fast-moving asteroid. Discovered in 1997, XF-11 was predicted to make an extremely close pass of the Earth in late 2028. To get a phone call in the middle of the night regarding this asteroid in particular could not mean anything good.
What kind of problem?
Its trajectory has changed. The new path has it on a collision course with Earth.
Chapter 1. Outside her window, the town of Great Neck, Long Island, was the very definition of chaos. Skyler Campbell stood in her kitchen and shook her head in disbelief as she looked out at the bedlam consuming her neighborhood. A neighborhood that had once hosted block parties and garage sales, where everyone knew each other, where everyone looked out for one another. A neighborhood where she personally had sold lemonade to passers-by no more than 10 years ago. This very same neighborhood with these very same neighbors was now an astonishing display of lawlessness, rioting, and mayhem. And selfishness, she thought to herself, something she should have expected, but didn't. Mr. Kensington, who had always given out full-size candy bars at Halloween, was in a fistfight with Mr. Chu, whose kids Skyler had babysat, seemingly over a parking spot. Mrs. Callahan, the president of the Rotary Club, was standing in the middle of the street, shrieking at nothing in particular. Not one person cared enough to find out why. Other people were also doing their best to turn a blind eye to their neighbors and friends. They had more important things to be concerned about. They were all busy packing their vehicles with every material possession that would fit. Big screen TVs, stereo systems, game consoles, desktop computers and monitors, clothes, appliances. It was funny to see what some people thought they needed to take with them when the world was coming to an end. It had been 5 years since scientists had discovered that 1997 XF-11 was no longer going to be just a close call. 5 years since her grandfather had come to pick her up from her freshman year homecoming game with a dark look on his face. Everything changed for her 5 years ago, but that wasn't the case for everyone. The mainstream media, countless politicians, and late-night television personalities had all downplayed the asteroid's impending arrival at first. The terms tinfoil hat and conspiracy theorists were tossed around ad nauseum. Jokes were made and people were targeted for their beliefs. Sometimes it was just a few posts on social media that cost them their jobs. Sometimes there was physical violence. Skyler wasn't sure why it seemed like their mission was to downplay all things XF-11. Perhaps it started as a well-meaning and meticulously orchestrated campaign to stave off a worldwide panic. Perhaps they were all just ill-informed. Whichever the reason, the downplay worked. A majority of the world's population chose to believe the rhetoric, and as a result, they were nowhere near prepared for what was coming. Exhibit A was happening right outside of Skyler's window. Exhibit B was happening everywhere else. Eventually, the press and the politicians began to amend their narrative. Well, yes, it's coming, but it'll fly right past us like every other asteroid does. It'll be a close call that may affect the ocean's tides, but not significantly. It's most likely unnecessary, but out of an abundance of caution, the UN has put together a special council to investigate XF-11. Our governments are working together to send missiles into space to head off the asteroid and destroy it before it even gets close to the Earth. That last narrative, the one with the missiles, that one went on for roughly 18 months. Turns out it's extremely hard to blow up something that is flying at 280,000 miles per hour. They tried. 3 times they tried. Never with the proper results. 6 months ago, the script flipped entirely. Without apologies to everyone who tried to give them ample warning, the mainstream media, the politicians, the late-night television personalities all got into the survival business. Hawking high-priced products, giving camera time to people who were more interested in selling merchandise than they were giving good and sound survival advice. But they did it in an entertaining way, and even in the shadow of certain doom, ratings mattered above everything else. In the middle of it all, there had been a presidential election. Somewhere between close call and abundance of caution, America elected her newest president. General Randall Jefferson had been an amazing candidate. A Medal of Honor winner and a 4-star general, he was humble, handsome, quick-witted, and seemingly of, by, and for the people. His campaign slogan, "Isn't it time we had another Jefferson in the White House?" resonated with both sides, and he was swept into office by an overwhelming majority of votes. Neither Skyler nor her grandfather had voted in the election. XF-11 and survival were their priorities. To them, it didn't matter who was in the White House. She sighed and adjusted her gaze in the window and focused on her own reflection. She wrinkled her nose in disapproval and tried to tame down the wisps of blonde hair that were escaping her ponytail holder. God, my hair just never behaves, she thought to herself, and then shook her head. Who cares what you look like? Incoming asteroid, remember, Sky? Behind her, she heard her grandfather enter the kitchen.
Good morning, darling. Happy Bunker Day.
Her grandfather, Everett Campbell, was a hero to Skyler, her brother Bryce, and countless others. A decorated member and eventual commander of Delta Force who retired from the Army early to raise Bryce and Skyler when they lost their mother to cancer more than 10 years ago. She turned from the window and gave him a weak smile. You were right, Grandpa.
About what this time?
She turned back towards the window, that this was going to bring out the worst in nearly everybody.
Things not getting any better outside, I take it.
Skyler shook her head. No. Some of them are at each other's throats. Others are packing their cars with flat screens and PlayStations because those will absolutely help their chances of survival when the grid is down and there's no electricity for months. Dumbasses. Everett walked up behind Skyler and took a look at the scene playing out in the street for himself.
No time like the present, I guess.
Yeah, except maybe the last few years we've all had to prepare for this. She paused for a moment as she looked out the window. I wonder where they even think they're going. Everett shook his head.
Well, according to this, they're heading for the city.
He raised the newspaper up and shook it.
But I don't suppose they'll get very far. The expressway's bound to be jammed.
Skyler sighed and turned away from the window. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a traffic jam on the LIE. Everett made his way to the kitchen table with his last morning paper while Skyler headed for the coffee maker. Coffee, Grandpa?
That sounds good to me.
There's coffee in the bunker, right? Skyler knew the answer to her question. Of all the creature comforts she could do without during an apocalypse, coffee was not one of them. This bit of teasing had become part of their morning routine.
You ask me that every day.
I know. I just want to be sure.
There is no coffee in the bunker. We didn't have enough room.
Grandpa! Everett chuckled.
Okay. Yes, coffee. A lot of coffee.
Thank you. She grinned at him. I swear that's the last time I'll ask.
You'll see soon enough for yourself. Now, do you mind if I put the radio on, Angel?
Bryce coming on soon?
Should be.
Everett reached over to the old fire engine red Bakelite tabletop radio and switched it on. That old radio had sat on that kitchen table for as long as Skyler could remember. If she had to guess, she would say it was at least 70 years old. It was in remarkably good shape for an antique. Or maybe that's why it was in good shape. A simple design, one speaker, a few knobs, an antenna with some wires and tubes hidden under its bright red exterior. No computer chips, no software, no Bluetooth, no internet, nothing modern about it at all. The original plug and play. Out of its one speaker came the voice of Jesse Jones. Politicians and reporters often referred to him disdainfully as a crackpot, but thanks to him, millions of his listeners were prepared for what was coming. He had had someone on the inside of NASA who gave him the lowdown on XF-11, and he had spent the last 5 years trying his best to convince people that it really was coming. Less than 24 hours before the asteroid was due to hurl its way to Earth, Jones was still fighting the good fight, broadcasting and warning anyone who would listen about the havoc that would be wreaked by 1997 XF-11.
Think about it, folks. 5 miles high, 5 miles wide, and coming at us at 280,000 miles an hour. Common sense tells us that nuking this thing out of the sky so close to the Earth's atmosphere will not end well for any of us. This is serious. Now, coming into the studio now, I have my good friend, more like a brother really, Bryce Campbell, who's going to give you all some last-minute advice on what you can do to save yourself and your families when the time comes.
Bryce Campbell had followed in his grandfather's footsteps. He'd joined the Army and was tapped for Delta Force after his first tour of duty in the Middle East. Because each branch of the military valued its members, they had not gone along with the politicians and the media's narratives. 6 months ago, they gave all of their people leave to prepare for XF-11. This was the catalyst for the change of narrative by the media and the politicians in Washington. When military members came home and let their families know why they got leave, there was no way to bury the truth any longer. The narrative shift was swift, but maintained a casual tone. Even the newspaper Everett was reading had that same tone. "Don't panic," admonished the cover in big bold type. Beneath it was an artist's rendition of nuclear missiles successfully breaking up the asteroid. That there even was a newspaper delivered to the house this morning, like it was any other morning, told Skyler how seriously many were still not taking XF-11. Skyler brought 2 freshly brewed mugs of hot coffee over to the kitchen table. She sat down with her grandfather and continued to listen to the broadcast.
Bryce, the countdown clock has begun, and in just a few hours from now, the U.S. will launch nuclear missiles into the sky to try and break this thing up before it enters our atmosphere. The results will surely be catastrophic. So what do you recommend people do to prepare for the apocalyptic events that will most definitely follow?
Jesse, thanks for having me on. First and foremost, stop everything and get underground now. Don't have a bunker? All major airports have reinforced underground levels, as do all military bases. These places were paid for with your tax dollars. Go there. Force your way in. This is not the time to be shy.
That's great advice, people.
Jesse agreed.
How about your loved ones, Bryce? Are they safe and sound somewhere?
They are absolutely safe. My grandfather and my sister will be riding out XF-11 in an old Cold War-era bunker on Long Island.
Everett put down the paper and took one last gulp of his coffee.
Maybe that's our cue, Angel.